My father walked out on me 20 years ago. Tonight I found out why. I hadn't seen my father in years. It had been 2 decades since I had set eyes on the man. My last clear memory of him was the one of him walking out the door when I was 5 years old. I had been watching cartoons. I turned just in time to see my dad's back as he walked out the door, wearing his standard blue jean jacket, with his head down as the door slammed behind him. My mother was on the floor, sitting cross-legged and crying a few feet away from me. The sight shocked me. My mom never cried, she was my rock, and I had never seen even as much as a tear from her. I crawled over to her and sat in her lap while she sobbed, completely at a loss of what to do. I remember I stroked her hair to comfort her. Something she had done countless times for me when I was sick or upset. "Where's Dad going?" I asked innocently. My mom looked at her, her eyes red and puffy from the crying. "Your daddy is gone, sweetie. Your daddy left us," she mumbled. The divorce had to be done in absentia. No one knew where he had gone. I remember walking around town with my grandmother putting up missing posters of my father. She could never accept that he had simply walked away from all of us. The posters stayed up for a few months before they all got torn down. Years passed, Mom remarried a great guy, I got therapy to deal with my dad leaving and eventually went off to college. Life was normal. Though I never stopped thinking about my dad, not really. Even when I thought I came to terms with it, I'd get the urge to Google his name or search for him on social media. But nothing ever turned up. That's why when he finally did message me, it came as a complete surprise. I was at work, messing around on my phone while I had reports to write when it popped up on my screen. "Is this David Lewis? From Topeka? And your mom's name is Penelope? If so, then this is your father. I have been trying to get in contact with you." I sat and stared at the message in disbelief. I set the phone down. Then picked it up again and read the message. While I was processing everything, more messages appeared. "David, I'm so sorry for everything. For these years I stayed away. I really need you to answer me. I need you to agree to come meet with me." My first instinct wasn't to reply. I was half convinced this was some kind of scam. Someone knew about my past and they were going to ask for a Venmo or money transfer. I finally replied. "How do I know this is really my father and not some kind of scam?" I waited for a reply. My heart was pounding, and a rush of thoughts were going through my head. If this was really my dad, I had a lot of things to say to him. Most of them weren't good. "I promise you I'm your dad. When you were a kid you had a ginger cat named Polka that died when you were 3. You had a stuffed teddy bear you slept with every night whose name was Mr. Simon. Please, David, this is really me and I need you to agree to meet with me." I stared at my phone. I was racking my brain trying to think of what to say. Tell him off? Tell him I'd gladly meet him because I had missed him all these years? I did neither. "I need some time to process this. Let me write you back later this evening. I'm at work and I need to focus." Holding the phone, I waited for his reply. It came quickly. "I understand. But please, I need an answer by tonight." Going back to my desk to work on the reports was almost surreal. It was like I was a ghost in my own body. I did get everything done though. It gave me something to focus on. Once I was home, I went straight to the bedroom and flopped on the bed, phone in hand. My fiancée wasn't home yet. Today was her late day at work. Of all the people I wanted to talk to the most, it was her, but she wouldn't be able to answer even if I did call. I read over the messages again. Honestly, I didn't have to reply at all. I could block him. Let him sit around and wonder what he did wrong to make me abandon him. But I did finally message back. The curiosity was too much. "Why do you even want to meet with me? If there's anything you want to say to me, just type it out." His reply was almost immediate. "David, I'm so glad you wrote back. I was afraid I had lost you. Trust me, I need to see you in person. If you never want to see or speak to me after that, I promise, I'll never reach out to you again." I laid the phone down on the bed and stared at the ceiling. This was just too surreal to me. The front door opened, and Alicia walked in. "I'm home," she called out. She walked into the bedroom when she couldn't find me in the living room. She looked down at me and furrowed her brow. "Are you okay? Did something happen?" she asked, concerned. I shook my head and held up my phone. My dad just messaged me. He wants to meet me tonight to talk in person. I don't know if I should agree to go or not," I explained, holding out the phone to her so she could read what he wrote for herself. Her eyes went wide. Of all the things I could have told her, this didn't seem to be one that she expected. She took the phone and read over the messages. "What do you want to do, babe? I know he's your dad, but he's essentially a stranger. You don't owe him anything. You still don't have to meet with him. Alicia assured me, holding my hand. I think I want to meet him. Even if it's just to find out why he left. I want to hear it from him, I said, squeezing her hand back. I turned back to the phone and typed out the message. Where do you want to meet? Send me the address. His response. Thank you so much, David. This means everything to me. I'm sending the address now. I was only mildly surprised when the address he sent me was only 30 minutes from our apartment. I looked it up on Google Maps and it showed a tiny cabin out in the woods. I felt a stab of anger from knowing he was this close to me and was only now reaching out to me. How long had he lived there? Years? Months? I would find out soon enough. Alicia insisted on coming with me, but I convinced her to stay at home. She had the address where I would be, and if she didn't hear from me in 2 hours she would call me. And if she didn't hear from me, she'd call the cops. She wasn't convinced yet that this wasn't some elaborate scam. I had plenty of time to think on the drive out to my dad's place. When I arrived, I felt a pang of anger at the house. It was a lovely little log cabin. I knew enough about the area to know it wasn't cheap, and I wondered what he had been doing all this time to afford such a nice place. Not paying child support, that was for sure. The car had barely come to halt before the door opened and a man opened the door and awkwardly walked up to the driver window. David. The man said, breathless, a small smile on my face. It was my dad. Now that he was here in the flesh, it didn't feel real at all. He looked haggard and thinner than his photo had let on. I stepped out of the car and he backed away to let me out, the small smile still on his face. Everything I had planned to say to him vanished from my head as he gestured towards the house. Come on. Let's get you inside. I have a lot to explain before it's time. He started moving to the cabin, not looking back to see if I was following. I followed. I started at the back of his head, glaring. He hadn't tried to hug me or touch me in any way, for which I was glad, but I was also disappointed that he hadn't tried. The inside was nice. Minimally but tastefully decorated. It had a woman's touch, as Alicia would like to say. Maybe he had a girlfriend or even a wife. Mom remarried. His name is Steve, he's a great guy, I blurted out. My dad turned and looked at me. The smile fell from his face and his eyes dropped. I know. I saw that on social media. She looks happy, he said softly. I shrugged. I had said that to hurt him, but now all it did was make me feel a little guilty. Why did you ask me to come here? After all this time? I just want you to know, if you're going to ask about getting a kidney or money from me, you can forget it, I snapped, my voice sharper than I had intended. I wanted to play it cool, collected, but I was too frazzled. He stared at me. His eyes were watery as if he was fighting back tears. He seemed at a loss for words. I shifted awkwardly on the couch, averting my eyes. I just needed to see you. I wanted to explain why I left. I'm not going to ask for forgiveness, but I do want you to understand why I did what I did, he said in a rush. I looked up at him. The obvious answer was that there had been another woman. Or maybe some kind of debt to the mafia, anything really. But now that I was about to learn the reason, all I felt was a slow simmering anger. No matter what excuse he gave me, it wouldn't be good enough. I'm a werewolf, he said simply, spreading his arms in a gesture of resignation. I had to admit that all the things I had thought he might say, this was not one of them. I see, I said slowly. He was mentally ill. Maybe he was schizophrenic or had some kind of mental break. Look, if you brought me all the way out here so you could spin some kind of fairy tale about why you left, save it. I can tell you're doing well for yourself. There's no need to lie to me, I gestured angrily around the cabin. His eyes followed my hands as I pointed to our surroundings, and a tiny smile formed on his lips. Oh, this isn't my house, David. The people who live here are on vacation and I broke in. But we needed a quiet place to talk, he explained, stepping closer. I stood up and sidestepped away, moving closer to the door. Are you serious? Do you have any idea how much trouble you'd be in if you're caught? You go to jail for stuff like that, I stammered. This wasn't going how I thought it would at all. I was wishing it was a scammer, it would have been less heartbreaking. He moved towards me, he lifted his shirt, and that's when I saw he had a gun holster on his belt with a small pistol housed in it. In a smooth motion he lifted out the gun and held it out to me. I need you to do one thing for me. In all these years I've been away, I've done nothing but try to find a cure for this. To end it, to cure it, it doesn't matter. All I could find was this. The only thing that can truly stop me is silver. I have this thing loaded with silver bullets. It had to be done by someone who loves the afflicted. Otherwise, it won't work. Trust me, I've tried the alternatives." His eyes were dripping tears as he thrust the revolver into my hands. I stared at it dumbfounded. "Dad. This is insane. You're insane. You need to go to a hospital." I stared in shock at the gun. I'd never held one before. "It must be done by someone who loves me. My parents are dead. I know your mom doesn't love me. It must be you, you're all I have." He gulped as he spoke. I held out the gun to him, but he stepped away and walked towards the door, blocking the exit. "Look, we don't have much time. Once night falls, this will happen quickly. And you should know I don't have control over myself when the change comes. I've killed people, without even remembering it. You won't be any different even if you are my son." He gulped again, the color draining from his face. I took a step back from him on reflex, clutching the gun to my chest protectively. I didn't want to give it up anymore. I didn't believe for a second that he was a werewolf, but giving him the gun seemed like a bad idea. "It's time to go outside now. No reason to ruin this nice house," he huffed, his breath was coming faster like he had just run a mile. His face, already pale, was taking on an alarmingly waxy texture that was making my stomach turn. I had no idea if he was having a stroke, but he suddenly did not look good. He stumbled outside and I followed him, not knowing what to do. I glanced at my car. I could just run to it and leave. Take the gun with me and call an ambulance for him. Don't even think of trying to make it to the car. You won't have time anyway. He looked up as the last rays of daylight vanished over the horizon. "It's happening. Forgive me, David. Please know I always loved you. I hope you still love me," he rasped as he doubled over, seemingly in pain. "Dad," I gasped, taking a few steps towards him. "No." He screeched at me, holding his hands out and backing away, before he fell to the ground and started convulsing. It happened instantaneously. In the movies I'd watched about werewolves, the transformation is always drawn out, painful and dramatic. But this wasn't it. His skin split open like it wasn't even skin anymore. It parted like his flesh was made of paper mache. My vision blurred as I took everything in. The beast rising from the sheds of skin and clothing and looking at me. Its eyes were a vicious amber, glowing and filled with pure malevolence. There was nothing human in them. We stared at each other for just a few seconds before it took a leap towards me, closing the distance between us in a split second. I shrieked and brought up my arm. The one with the gun. The creature was close enough for me to touch. I could smell the wet animal smell of its fur as it reached out towards me. I fired the gun on instinct. I fired twice, one bullet hitting the thing in its cheek and the second in the chest where the heart should be. The beast let out an almost dainty and human-sounding gasp as it collapsed sideways. It looked surprised as it hit the dirt. I dropped the gun, my fingers numb from shock, and I ran to my car. I started the car and peeled out of the driveway. The headlights briefly illuminated the thing's body as I drove away. It hadn't moved. The shock hit me as I was driving, and I struggled to keep myself on the road. I kept looking in the rearview mirror expecting to see that thing chasing me down. But there was only darkness behind me. I didn't call the cops, or an ambulance. I cried silently the whole way home. There was nothing I could tell anyone that would make any sense to anyone. Alicia had waited up for me, and when I burst in the front door she gasped and asked me what had happened. I couldn't tell her the truth. I made up a lie on the spot, that I had met my dad, and he was a drug addict asking for money. That the cabin wasn't even his but a place he had broken into. I had to talk her out of calling the cops. There was no way I could ever explain why there was a dead lycanthrope in the driveway. She stayed up with me until exhaustion finally took her and she passed out on the couch. I stayed awake though. There was no way I could sleep. I sat in the dark sipping coffee and shaking. When the first rays of light peeked through the blinds, I let out a sigh of relief. The sunlight brought sanity with it, and I could start trying to convince myself that I had hallucinated this whole night. That's when my phone buzzed and I reflexively looked at the message that popped up on my screen, and my heart dropped. It was just a single sentence. "David, it didn't work." My father is a park ranger. He took me with him on the night shift. I should have listened to his rules. This is how the human mind works. When you're walking through a forest, you don't think too much. You just let the silence surround you, feel the soft breeze and the branches crack under your feet. It's in our nature to yearn for such scenery. No matter how much we thrive in busy, concrete-soaked cities, forests are always welcoming and refreshing to us. The air is clear and crisp, and daylight plays hide and seek through the tall branches. It's inspiring and beautiful. Sometimes, though, as you walk on your path, your mind begins to focus on small things, noises, gusts of wind, shadows in the trees. Such silence can be both welcoming and unsettling, depends on how you view it. Forests are double-sided coins, they hide you away from the tiring city landscape, but expose you to another environment. You're not in control anymore, because this is not your home. You can lie to yourself and build a house there, but you don't belong in a forest. You're merely a visitor. That's national parks for you, an illusion of being in control. The fake freedom you feel when you walk on those marked paths and camp in the square assigned to you, when you think the silence around you is peaceful, but even the silence is an illusion. Visit a forest again, even when it's silent, is it, really? It's not. Complete, absolute silence means death. Fear it. My father taught me that. He's a park ranger, and he's been doing this job since forever. I wasn't much of a fan of national parks, especially because most of the time there's no service and the hikes are killing me. I'd rather enjoy nature by swimming in a lake or skiing. Why break your legs to end up to a high point, just to see a random valley? Not to mention the animals, they were everywhere, and the insects always got on my nerves. I never understood his love for the forest. I guess that was one of the reasons why he started telling me scary stories from his night shift. Looking back, they were obviously made up, but to younger me, they seemed believable. I used to think he was so brave for working the night shift. As I got older, I got into horror and, even if I didn't believe in his forest creatures anymore, I still liked the idea of spending the night in a small cabin in the middle of nowhere, just for that dose of adrenaline. When my father said he wanted to take me with him, I accepted immediately. I knew why he offered. See, over the past years, our relationship had taken a big hit. I guess I was growing up and he didn't know how to handle that. He'd become emotionally distant and seemed to repel any of my tries to open up to him. In return, I'd become uninterested and irritable. In the words of my mother, this would have been a fun way to bond, I guess. We arrived at the park around 9 p.m. His shift started at 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. His Jeep pierced through the darkness and ventured into the woods. The headlights flashed the trees, turning them white against the black sky. I'd never been on this route but, again, my visits to the park were rare. We drove for a while. Most of the time, people underestimate the size of national parks. It took us an hour and a half to get to the cabin, which wasn't even in the heart of the forest. I saw it, one single trace of humanity in the middle of nowhere, a tiny, wooden cabin with flickering light bulbs and watchdogs. Before we got out of the car, my father stopped me. Listen. There's some instructions you need to follow here. I know it might seem unimportant, but they're crucial. Then, he handed me a piece of paper. A list of handwritten rules. At first, they were ordinary: don't go out alone in the park, don't leave food out, etc. I thought the rest of the rules had been put there just to freak me out. Dad, I'm not 12 anymore. You can't freak me out with this shit. I'm not trying to. You wanted to come here with me, so act accordingly. What even is this? If you see a man without an arm, don't help him. We have all kinds of weirdos around here. And this? If the whistling is near you, it means they're far? My father smiled, but his eyes didn't. Some of these are added by superstitious fellas. It's more of a what if. It's not gonna happen to you. 1. Don't go out alone in the park. Always have a working contact device. 2. Don't leave marked paths, unless instructed to or with proper equipment. 3. Don't leave food out, and lock the trash bins. 4. Always keep on the whistle and the badge. 5. If you see a man without an arm, don't help him. 6. Your family is not in here. Remember. There is no reason for you to hear their voices from outside. 7. Lock your car doors, even when you are driving. 8. Check the marks on the trees. There's only 3 types of marks, all triangles. Red, yellow and green. Other marks are not ours. Don't follow them. 9. If the whistling is near you, it means they're far. If it's far away, it means they're near. 10. Beware of dead blue. What is dead blue? I asked. My father sighed. You know when you're out in the woods? When you think what you hear is silence, but you realize there's dozens of sounds around you, from birds to crickets to leaves rustling. Yeah. That's because there's no such thing as silence. Absolute silence. Never. There's always sound. Movement. Life. Dead blue is complete and utter silence. That's our code name for it. Death-inducing silence. Unnatural. Right. And when that happens, it won't. But if it does? He paused, staring at the steering wheel. Then, his head turned to me. His eyes darted from mine to the window behind me. You leave. That being said, he got out of the car and I followed. The cabin was dusty and cramped. I couldn't understand how he could spend 8 hours in here. He had a small TV, but it wasn't working, a desk, and a mini fridge. You sit here all alone? I asked. Yeah. Why, that freak you out? Don't you get bored? Martin's post is 10 minutes away. Sometimes I just drive over. Nothing really happens out here anyway. My spot is pretty far from the campsites. I just have to patrol from time to time to make sure no one wanders off into the night, but that rarely happens. This is one of the wilder areas, less explored. You haven't explored it all? His eyes sparkled. Wouldn't be possible. So you don't know what's out there? That's the fun of it. You said you wanted adrenaline. There you go. I nodded. He opened the mini fridge and threw me some juice. Orange juice. I'd mentioned I liked this brand once, and he'd remembered. Maybe our relationship wasn't so bad. We sat next to each other in the small cabin. Dad locked it. I'm not gonna lie to you, most of the time I just sleep. Literally nothing ever happens. So you really didn't see any creatures out there, like the ones you told me about when I was little? I jokingly asked. The only creature out there is my manager, and I'd rather face a million cryptids than talk to him. I laughed. I leaned in to look out the windows. I can't see anything. Just my reflection. Want me to dim down the light? Yeah. He did, and darkness crept inside the tiny cabin. The woods became more prominent, more vivid. The light made by the moon was unbelievable, and the stars were actually visible, compared to the polluted city. The cabin was on a hill, propped up a tree, with a trapdoor and a ladder leading to our car. We could actually see above the tree line, into the valley. We spent the first hours talking. Somewhere around midnight, I began dozing off. I didn't want to, but I caved in and fell asleep with my head on the desk. He woke me up. I rubbed my eyes in confusion. What time is it? I got a call from Martin. Right. Who? Was Martin? I mumbled. The other one in the area. He says he got a call from the campsite, and someone's missing. We need to go search for him. We? As in us? Yeah. You'll stay in the back seat. I'm on the phone with Martin right now. I could hear Martin's muffled voice through the speaker. Wait, don't take the kid. Why not? He'll stay in the car. Paul, it could be one of those nights. We won't get out of the car. You can't guarantee that. Well, I can't leave him here. Alone. In the dark. A pause followed. Look, Paul, I understand you wanted to do a take your kid to work day, but I don't know about this one. It could be dangerous. We're literally just going to drive around for a bit. It's fine. Leave him in the cabin. Dad put his hand over one of the speakers, so I didn't understand what Martin told him. His eyes kept darting to the window behind me. He sighed. Martin will come pick me up. You are staying here, locked. Turn the lights off and wait for me to return. It's gonna take a minute and you'll be safe here. What? I'm not staying here alone. What did Martin tell you to change your mind? It doesn't matter. I'll return in maximum half an hour. You can go back to sleep if you want. Or I can call you and we can talk. I was afraid. Truly afraid. I did not want to show it, especially after I'd complained that nothing interesting happened around there, so I reluctantly agreed. My dad opened the trapdoor and climbed down the ladder, then his face disappeared into the darkness. I saw Martin's car pick him up and drive away. Silence followed. I wished I'd been home, in my bed. Instead, I sat stiff on the chair, and waited. And waited. I began imagining the worst. What if they'd crashed? What if a bear had found them? I didn't want to let my fear get the best of me, but I thought about his legends, and the set of rules. I hoped the writers were just paranoid. At around 2 a.m., I heard a knock on the trap door. I felt my chest tighten. Another knock followed. I wanted to respond, but something in me didn't allow me to. Then, I heard my dad's voice. Kev, open. It's cold out here. It echoed through the cabin. My eyes were dry from the lack of sleep, but my mind was fully awake. I stared at the phone. Then, at the trap door. Kev, open, please. I know you're there, I saw you at the window. I turned off the light, completely. I don't know why I had this urge, but if my dad could see me from the window, Anyone could. Or anything. And I didn't like to be on display like that. You don't have a key? It locks from the inside. Shit, yeah. How was it? Did you find him? Yeah, we did. He was drunk off his ass. We helped him return to his friends. Could have been a lot worse. As I was talking to him, I searched for the keys in the drawer. It was strange, because I hadn't heard anyone climbing the ladder. Or seen Martin's car drive my dad back to the cabin. How did you get here, without Martin? What do you mean? Open up, Kev, I'm freezing. Answer the question. He did drive me here. Didn't see any headlights. They were off, to not draw the attention of animals. Bullshit. I pulled out the crumpled piece of paper. 6. Your family is not in here. Remember. There is no reason for you to hear their voices from outside. My hand was shaking so bad, I could barely grab the phone. I skimmed through my contacts. Kate F. Connor. Dad. I called him. The phone was ringing, yet no sound came from beneath the trapdoor. My dad picked up. Anything okay? In the blinding darkness of the cabin, surrounded by the howling wind, I toned my voice down to a whisper. Dad, someone out there is pretending to be you. A long pause followed. When he spoke, his voice was trembling. Don't open. Turn off the lights. Did you turn them off when I told you? I turned them off now. No, you should have turned them off when I left. I'm sorry. It's fine. Don't talk to it. Did you talk to it? Guilt crept up my spine. I don't know why, but I lied. I did not. Good. Stay put. I'm coming after you. But what if the thing sees you? You'll have to face it. We have ways to distract them. It's fine. Don't be scared. I lied again. I'm not. Good. I love you. I'm coming. I wasn't scared for me. I was scared for him. The voice from below continued. Kev, please open. Please. It's cold. I didn't answer. Knocks followed. The voice went on. Did you talk to someone on the phone? Kev, I lost my phone in the woods. Whoever is out there and has my phone is not me. It's not me. It's not me. It kept repeating. It's not me. It's not me. I began feeling lightheaded. Fear is one thing, but this was a combination of anxiety, stress, and guilt. I tried to control my breaths, but to no avail. The cabin was spinning around me. It's not 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 me. Shut up. Shut up. And it did. Silence followed. I pulled out the list again and started reading and rereading the rules, like a lunatic. I kept listening for noises from outside. The wind was still going. Good. No dead blue. Then, I heard a loud thud from my wall. Another followed, and another. It sounded like footsteps? They moved to the roof of the cabin. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Whatever was out there was now climbing around my cabin. I could hear the scratching outside. I started to cry, and covered my mouth with my hand. I just wanted my dad. I wished I could see his face again. The universe, somehow, ironically responded, because my dad's face suddenly appeared at one of the windows. He raised his hand and knocked. I stared at him through my eyebrows, my head tilted. Scarcely breathing, I remained still. He kept knocking. That wasn't my dad. The cabin was tied to a tree, at around 10 meters from the ground. He could not be at the window. The creature knocked, and for what seemed like an eternity, we just made eye contact. Blood was dripping from one of its nostrils. Another phone call woke me from my trance. Kevin, are you there? Are you in the cabin? Yes. And the thing looks like you. And it's at the window. I'm coming right now. I'll shoot it. Don't worry. I'm just about to turn a corner. Dad, I'm really scared for you. Martin's coming, too. It's okay. Truly, in a few minutes, Martin's car pulled up. I cried in relief. The thing turned its head to look, then back to me. It opened its mouth wide, and, using its fingers, pulled the corners upwards, to form a smile, then jumped into the woods, into the darkness. Gunshots followed. After a few silent minutes, I called my dad. He picked up. "Where are you?" I asked. "I'm coming to get you." I saw him walk towards the cabin, then heard him climb up the stairs. I unlocked the trapdoor and hugged him tight. "What was that? Please, tell me we're going home." "We are. I'm so sorry. I should have never put you through this. Come on." As we walked towards our car, my blood ran cold. It was not something I'd seen or heard, but the opposite. See, the wind had stopped. The crickets had stopped. Dead blue. I sprinted to the car, got into the driver's seat, then locked the doors. My dad was standing in front of the car, confused. That's when I got a text, and I hit the gas. I ran him over, then turned the car around and sped up into the night. I barely knew how to work it out, since I didn't have my license, but I left as quick as possible. Behind me, a car followed. When I got to the nearest checkpoint, I stopped. The car was Martin's. He got out, alone. "Where's my dad?" I asked. "He, took an ATV to get you. Said he'd get there faster. I texted him to turn around, and that you were safe." The text he'd sent me. "Martin and I split up. He may get there faster than me, and if he does, he'll text me to turn and head to the checkpoint. There is no one with Martin. He's alone." I'd thought I'd unlocked the trap door to my dad, when he'd actually taken an ATV and turned to the checkpoint. The thing I'd ran over wasn't my dad, and I'd known it since I felt that unnerving silence. However, no one at the checkpoint had seen my father. As I'm typing this, I'm afraid for him, but a part of me knows he's alive. Maybe he took another route, or got lost. Whatever he did, I'll find him. Every photo I took ended in tragedy. It was the early 2010s when I found my father's camera. A relic from another era, one of his countless forgotten things confined to the attic after his passing. In life, he had this obsession with it. Not like someone obsessed with photography, but something deeper, stranger. It was like the camera had consumed him, his hands bound to it as if it were one with his flesh, and in most of my memories of him, his face is hidden behind it. He existed only beyond its lens, like the world didn't matter unless he was seeing it through that damn viewfinder. Rediscovering the camera felt like a chance to reconnect with him after all of these years. I was 17 at the time, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little excited to find it. It was an old Quick Take 100, clunky and covered in dust. The thing looked ancient, by tech standards, and holding it, it felt heavy. Not just in weight, but in something else. Almost like I could feel my dad's attachment to it, his love for it tangible in plastic and metal. And for a moment, I thought maybe I could see what he saw. Maybe I could understand why it seemed to matter more than we did. This was his totem, his artistic lifeline, and perhaps knowing this I should have left it undisturbed. I should have left it there, buried beneath old furniture and junk. But I didn't. The first incident, it all happened so fast. I had just wiped the dust off the lens, standing by my bedroom window. My best friend, Charlie, he lived across the street, and I remember seeing him in his room, just a blur of motion through the glass. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the neighborhood, and it seemed like a good time to test the camera, to see if it even worked after all these years. And so, I lifted the viewfinder to my eye, lining up the shot, and pressed the button on its side. The flash went off, bright and glaring. And then, chaos. A deafening boom rocked the air, shaking my house as if we were caught in an earthquake. I stumbled back to my bed, hands covering my face as a burst of radiant light seared through my window. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. I smelled smoke, it assaulted my nostrils almost instantly, and the scent of burning wood, it was strong. So I pushed myself off my bed, staggering over to the window, and that's when I saw it. Charlie's house was gone. Where his house once stood was nothing but a hellish crater, flames licking up into the sky. The remains of his home were scattered in all directions, as if something had reached down from the heavens and ripped it apart. The noise, the smoke, the screams. They were everywhere. My mom rushed outside, I heard the door hit the wall as she tore it open, pulling my sister with her, both of them in hysterics. But I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at the chaos, paralyzed by the shock of what I'd just witnessed. I remained frozen until the fire engines arrived, beginning their futile attempt to quell the inferno, but God, how it burned. It burned and it burned and it burned, the flames raging on into the night, glowing like a second sun in the darkness. Charlie and his family. Incinerated in an instant. Gone, just like that, wiped off the face of the earth. They never stood a chance. A few weeks later, the official report blamed it on a gas leak. And I believed it at first, I had to. What else could explain something so sudden, so violent? But I was naive. I had no idea at the time, it was just a freak accident. I had just happened to capture it. A year or so later, I found the camera again. It was like it reappeared in my bedroom. Hidden in plain sight amongst the clutter, I rediscovered it whilst packing up for university. I was moving far from home, and I plugged it into the family computer, hoping to find some of my father's old photos. These cameras, apparently they can only hold about 8 photographs at a time, so I was curious to see if he'd left a few on there before his passing. But he hadn't, I discovered that quickly. The curious smile on my face fell into a frown. But there was one photo on there, a singular file in its memory. Just one horrifying photograph that made my heart stop. I opened it up, the image exploding onto my screen, and tears rolled over my cheeks. In the image, the house had been caught mid-explosion, walls buckling, windows shattering, fire erupting from the ground. I'd captured the exact moment the house was obliterated. And something about it felt wrong. Like it wasn't just a coincidence. Like I had caused it, somehow, with the flick of my finger, the button akin to the trigger of a gun. Terrified, I deleted the photo. I didn't think, I just wanted it gone, away from my tear-filled eyes. But even after it was wiped, that feeling stayed. This nagging sense that the camera was more than just a piece of equipment. That it held on to things. Dark things. My father had been obsessed with it for a reason. So I didn't touch the camera again for a while. But, like a cursed object from an old horror movie, I couldn't shake its presence. When I left home one year for my final term of university, I brought it with me, I don't even know why. It just ended up in my bag, like it wanted to come along, and for months, it sat on a shelf in my dorm room, collecting dust. It stared at me from its spot, its lens like an unblinking eye, and sometimes I felt like my father was watching me through it. I swear I could see his eye in the lens from time to time, but I knew I was just being paranoid. Perhaps I'd had one too many coffees during a late-night study. So I left it alone. I let it, him, watch over me undisturbed. Until one day, I couldn't. It was late and I was stressed out from a final project. It was going to be making up most of my grade. I needed a distraction, so I grabbed the camera, telling myself it was harmless. I stood in front of my mirror, holding it up to my face, and for a second, I considered taking a picture of myself. My finger hovered over the button, a smile blooming on my face, but something stopped me. I felt dread. A cold wave of fear washed over me, and I remembered the explosion. The fire. Charlie. I put the camera down. I relived the explosion all over again, and for a while, I was frozen to the spot. But then the next day, I took it with me to campus. I can't tell you why, but I just felt like I needed to. My friend Sarah and I were hanging out by a smoking shelter with a few other students. They were fascinated by the old camera, calling it a piece of history. They begged me to take a photo of them, Sarah and these 3 other girls I didn't know, but I was hesitant. I was shaking at just the thought of it. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, but they kept urging me on. So I agreed to it, against my better judgment. I stood up, and they moved into place behind a row of bollards, posing and pouting. It was by no means a serious photograph. Lifting the viewfinder to my eye, I struggled to still the shot, my hands still shaking with anxiety, but I calmed myself, slowing my breathing. I thought I was simply scaring myself. What happened to Charlie? That was a freak accident. There was no way this camera had any part in its doing. And so I pressed the button, I pulled the trigger. And what happened next? It was all on me. The flash went off. The world transformed into white light and my eyes burned as if I had stared into the sun. But screaming followed. I heard bodies hitting metal, then the sound of flesh pounding the ground, bones breaking upon impact. The gargled sound of blood pooling in someone's throat. The continuous, monotonous beep of a car horn. It came out of nowhere, swerving wildly down the road. I'd heard it coming, but I never foresaw this happening. The driver, a drunk student, had lost control of the wheel. The girls were thrown into the air like ragdolls, killed the moment their skin touched the bumper, but I had witnessed none of it. I'd held my eyes shut after the flash as if I knew what was coming, and instantly I regretted not trusting my gut. I knew this was going to happen. I just knew something would happen, I could feel it. But now they were dead. All 3 of them. Dead. And so too was the driver, his car wrapped around a concrete pillar, his skull crushed against the horn, the sound wailing like a scream. And I was numb. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The deaths. The destruction. The 2 times I used this camera, death had followed. And it wasn't a coincidence, I was certain of that. It wasn't just bad luck. This camera was the cause, the murderer, the executioner. It killed. I don't know how else to put it, and I know it sounds ridiculous, but if you held it in your hands, you would feel it too. It was more than plastic and metal, this camera. It was satanic. It was hellish. It was under the influence of evil, possessed or hexed. And I should have destroyed it before it took another life, but for some reason, perhaps it was its power, I simply couldn't. That summer, I left the camera on my desk, untouched, as if ignoring it could somehow undo the damage. But it was still there, watching me. Waiting. Waiting for the day I'd pick it up again, once I convinced myself that everything was just a coincidence. That day came when winter rolled around. Enough time had passed for the fear to dull, for the memories to blur. The idea that the camera was responsible for those deaths, it seemed ridiculous. Something I'd imagined in the chaos and grief. Until one night, a sick curiosity crept in. It was late, around 3 a.m., when I gave in to the urge. My laptop was glowing in the dark, the cursor hovering over the camera's file. I'd grown fascinated with death over the summer, consuming gore videos online, each one more gruesome than the last. I told myself it was to desensitize, to numb the horror that I had witnessed, but really, I was sinking deeper into something I didn't want to understand. I wasn't proud of it, but I needed to see that photo. The one I took right before the girls died, before their souls were ripped from their bodies. I wanted to stare death in the face. To see the exact moment their lives ended, captured in stillness. And in a way, it felt like I had created my own personal snuff film. This photo could rise above what I had seen online. You probably think I'm disgusting for saying that, and you'd be right, I know it myself. And there it was, the singular photo file. It stared back at me through the screen, taunting me, daring me to open it. And so I did. I clicked, I indulged, and opened it to full screen. I gasped. The car mid-crash, the girls suspended in the air like broken marionettes. The first 2 were twisted grotesquely, limbs bent at impossible angles, skin tearing as they were ripped apart from the force. Their heads were snapped back, throats extended unnaturally, the moment of their deaths frozen forever. The third girl. She hadn't yet hit the car, but the bumper was inches from her, and in that split second, she'd turned her head. She was looking right at it, right at her death. And it was devastating, I could see the fear in her eyes. But what made my stomach twist was Sarah. She was perfectly fine. Still standing, hands in her pockets, staring straight at the camera. At me. It was nothing was happening around her. She wasn't part of the chaos, wasn't caught in the carnage. She was just there. Smiling, ready for her picture, but her eyes, God, her eyes. They burned through the screen, locked onto mine. I could feel her seeing me like she wasn't just a figure in a photograph. As if, even in death, she was still looking at me, still waiting for me to press that button again, to ignite the camera flash. My breath caught in my throat. My skin crawled. I slammed the laptop shut, yanking the camera cable out, nearly ripping it apart. My heart pounded as I stumbled out of bed, needing air, needing to get away from that photo. I rushed to the window, sucking in deep breaths as I leaned against the cold glass, and stared out at the street. The house across the road was an empty lot now, it hadn't changed in years. It was a patch of blackened earth, the damage like a scar on the land's flesh. A remnant of the horror that had occurred. Just looking at it made my chest tighten, my nose tingling with the phantom smell of smoke. I couldn't escape the memory of that fire, the flames licking up into the sky, the heat against my skin. And in that moment, I made a decision. I had to get rid of the camera. Once might have been a freak accident. Twice could still be a coincidence. But 3 times? If something happened again, if another life was lost, there would be no more pretending. No more comforting myself with lies. If I took one more photo, and someone else died. What would that mean? That the camera was truly cursed? That it held some evil, some power I couldn't understand? And what about my father? How did he fit into all of this? What had he seen through its lens? No. I couldn't think about that. I didn't want to. The camera had to go. It was better off gone. But I struggled to let it go. For days, the camera sat there, untouched, perched on the edge of my desk, waiting. Every time I went to throw it away, I hesitated. I couldn't explain the power it had over me, It felt like it was fighting for its survival. So, it stayed there for weeks, teetering dangerously close to the edge, until one evening, after spiraling once again into another binge of gore videos, I finally built up the courage to let it go. That last video, another gruesome car crash, pushed me over the edge. It was too much. The blood, the twisted wreckage. It brought back the sound of the screams, the thud of bodies against the pavement, the horror of the police cordon that haunted me when I left campus early, unable to finish the term. I had to get rid of it, before it took another life, and I had to do it now. But when I reached for the camera, it was gone. Panic gripped me. My chest tightened, my heart racing as I began to tear apart my room. The camera had to be here, it had to be. I couldn't risk it ending up in someone else's hands. I ripped through drawers, threw clothes on the floor, overturned my bed, but the camera had simply vanished. And I knew, someone had taken it. I was a fool to leave it on my desk for the taking. I bolted down the stairs, my legs shaking beneath me, startling my mother as I burst into the living room. She looked up from her glass of wine, alarmed by the terror on my face. I stammered, demanding to know if she'd seen it, the camera, the one my father had cherished. Maybe she'd put it back in the attic, where it belonged. But no. Of course not. Her answer knocked the breath from me, my stomach lurching. "It's with your sister," she said, so casually. So innocently. She had no idea the weight of those words, no idea of the danger. I felt the blood drain from my face, bile rising in my throat as I begged her, where was she? Where was my sister? Her next words were worse. "She's at Sienna's house. Just down the road. They're having a party." My world collapsed. I gasped, my lungs squeezing tight as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. A cold finger of dread traced its way down my spine. I didn't think, I just ran. I tore through the front door with such force it slammed against the wall, my mother calling after me, but I couldn't stop. The night air was freezing, my breath visible in front of me as I sprinted down the street, each step heavier than the last. My lungs burned like fire, but I kept going, screaming her name into the darkness, a sense of dread building with every stride. That awful feeling, like every time before the deaths, it came back to me. The weight of impending doom settled in my gut. I could see the house now, just up ahead. My legs were shaking, cramping with pain, but I pushed through it, my heart thundering in my ears. I had to get there. I had to save her, save everyone from the damned camera. But I was too late. Just seconds too late, my feet barely scraping the lawn. The sound of shattering glass pierced the night. Then came the flames. They burst outwards, consuming the house in an instant, searing my skin as I was thrown backwards by the force of the explosion. My head hit the ground, the world spinning as I struggled to focus through blurry vision. I could barely make out people running from the blaze, their bodies engulfed in flames, their clothes igniting, their flesh melting. And all I could do was sob. I had let this happen. I had let the camera be taken, let it fall into the hands of someone who had no idea what it was capable of. And now my sister, was in there, turning to ash in the center of the inferno. She didn't know. She had no way of knowing. But I should have gotten there sooner. This fire too, after a long investigation, was ruled as another gas leak, the second on our street. Another tragic accident, they said, but I knew better. It wasn't gas, nor was it an accident. It was the camera. They recovered my sister's body, but it was burned beyond recognition, along with 24 other partygoers. My mother was devastated, the whole street mourned again, but I knew it was my fault. I had let this happen. I had let it take another life, many more lives. And though the camera was destroyed in the blaze, reduced to nothing but ash along with my sister, at least I can live knowing it won't harm anyone else. But it came at a cost. It tore away a piece of my heart, and my mother, she was never the same after that day. How could she be? She'd lost everything. She barely even existed to me after my sister died, she was mourning eternally. It's all she could do. She floated through life as if she was already dead, so her passing a few years later felt like mercy. She was suffering in life, she was hardly alive, but at least she's at rest now. That leaves only me. But the camera, at least it's gone forever now. But the guilt? The guilt will never leave me. And some nights, I lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if it's all truly over. If it really died in those flames, are flames enough to extinguish such evil? But other nights, I wonder if it's simply waiting for someone else to find it so its flash can play the executioner once again.